Since the beginning of time, people have been creating things. Some products even attain cult status. But why? What is their secret? Handmade axes from Sweden. We check out their cult potential. The eye. This is the name of the opening that makes the handle and head into one unit. The beard. It provides balance and strengthens the axe. The bit. An ancient forging technique makes it particularly sharp. The handle. The Swedes swear by flexible hickory wood. For 110 years, the Gränsfors forge has been producing axes like this in the traditional way. Among forest workers, they're considered the epitome of a cult tool. World record holder and German wood-chopping champion Robert Ebner explains to us what makes them so special. Every blacksmith has his initials here. I really have a unique tool in my hand, not something that comes off the production line. So yes, this axe really is cult. But where does this cult originate? A winter's day in Bergsjö, just about 330 kilometers north of Stockholm, a very specific rhythm characterizes the region. It's the hammering from the Gränsfors forge, one of the last in Europe that still forms steel by hand. This is the story of a blacksmith and his craft. Over 40 years of experience hammering precisely in time, Lars Enander knows the value of his work.
There's a special feeling in owning something that's made by hand.
An axe is born in fire. Lars first has to heat up the steel to about 800 degrees. His experience tells him when the time is up. Helping him in the forge today, his assistant, Ulrika Stridsberg. First, they have to shape the axe eye. This is the name of the opening through which the handle will later come. Lars places the so-called spike exactly in the middle. Everything now has to fit precisely, because if the axe becomes asymmetrical, its balance would be lost and a breaking point would be inevitable. The eye is already perfect. All that's needed now is the right handle. The owner of the forge, Gabriel Brandby, plans the axe handle together with blacksmith Lennart Pedersen. Kneeling down and drawing on the floor with chalk. No joke. This is what product development is like in Bergsjö. Every handle that Gränsfors develops for its axes was designed in this way. However, the forge cannot manage the entire handle production on its own. Gabriel and his team only produced a prototype. This then serves as a template for the large-scale production. This is then done by a partner manufacturer. The Swedes develop a new handle about every 3 years. Technical approval is a matter for the boss. Gabriel is satisfied. The handle goes into production. Meanwhile, Ulrika and Lars continue to fire up the kiln. The steel has to be put into the embers again and again. It's time to take care of the axe bit. To do this, the 2.5 centimeter thick steel must first be flattened at the front with sheer muscle power. Lars splits the axe edge right in the middle. He wants to forge another kind of steel into it. To do this successfully, he has to heat up the insert to about 1200 degrees, a supremely skilled discipline that only an experienced blacksmith can master, fire welding. This cannot be done by machine. This craftsmanship is the decisive advantage for Lars's axes. Precision is needed so that 2 steels can be forged into one. There's no way to measure. I trust my experience and my sense of proportion. The less carbon a steel contains, the higher its melting temperature is. The red-hot insert is soft, low-carbon steel, so it has a high melting temperature. The hard, small piece of steel is rich in carbon, so its melting temperature is low. To prevent the hot or soft steel from burning the hard one, Lars uses borax powder to protect the small piece of steel. This combination of hard and soft steel makes the axe stable at the front and flexible at the back. Mass-produced axes are perhaps almost as good as mine, but the people who buy my axes want the special feeling that this one was still made by hand, completely in the traditional way. Each one is unique. No two axes are the same. And yes, mine are a bit better, because with the fusion method, I can use different steels, so they stay sharp longer. Fusion. The fusion of two steels into one structure. This is where Lars has to demonstrate all his skills. Only when the hard core becomes completely one with the soft insert can the master speak of a perfect axe. This axe will later cost just under 200 euros. Individual custom-made axes can cost up to 400. Now it's time to shape the blade, evenly and rhythmically, almost like a machine. The shaping process involves forming the beard. This leads to the metal atoms being compressed together. They thus form a more stable unit. At the same time, the axe is better balanced and offers a greater contact surface so that the axe handle sits firmly. They cut off the edge and the axe head is finished. Lars makes between 300 and 400 axes a year. Each one is unique, with a 20-year guarantee. But before this axe can do any work, there's still a lot of work to be done. Owner Gabriel Brandby takes us to the forge's own axe museum. He spends time here almost every day for inspiration. Over the years, the forge has collected more than 2,000 axes. The oldest is a 3,500-year-old stone axe. From all parts of the world and from all eras, this house is completely dedicated to mankind's oldest tool. But this here is not just an exhibition of history. The museum has its very own value for the blacksmiths. We call it our axe museum, but in reality it's our database. A good example is this old axe. Here we have another old handle. Someone wrapped a piece of tin can around the handle to protect it. We took this as an example and gradually developed a metal sleeve for our axes. These old axes have helped us to improve our own. This is just one example of how we use our collection. The Swedes swear by handles made of American hickory wood. Unlike plastic handles, the wooden handle does not transmit the vibrations caused by the blow up into the arm. The fiberglass-like structure also makes it extremely resilient. His great-great-grandfather was a blacksmith, and so Lars also had to follow the family tradition. By now, probably thousands of people are happy that his family was so strict and that they can therefore be the proud owner of one of his axes. The rough grinding is the final step that determines the shape of the axe. Once that's been completed, it's time for hardening. The forging process has made the structure of the steel brittle. The heat brings the atom chains back into order. The sudden cold shock in the oil results in the atoms forming a stable lattice microstructure. It increases the resistance of the axe, but it also creates high tension in the workpiece. Oil does not quench the steel as quickly as water, which means there is less distortion. To allow the tension to escape from the steel, Lars uses an old tradition. Instead of putting the axe in a furnace, as is the custom nowadays, he heats a steel block to about 500 degrees. This allows the axe to relax. The axe head is finished, but Lars cannot chop wood with it yet. He still has to grind it first. The Swedish sun is only a brief visitor in winter. Gabriel Brandby takes advantage of the last light to relax while throwing an axe. He founded the Swedish Axe Throwing Association over 20 years ago. In this region, everything revolves around this cult object. The next morning. Today is the official birthday of a new axe. Lars Enander still has to sharpen the axe. The steel blank finally becomes a tool, and a pretty sharp one too, as the test shows. I don't always do this, only sometimes just to show off, but it's a good test. The axe head is perfect, but the most important moment still lies ahead of it. The new handle that Gabriel and Lennart designed has now arrived from the manufacturers. Now it's time for axe and handle to be joined together for eternity. A wedge driven into the centre, and nothing shall separate them again. Shaped, tempered, and finally born from the hands of a simple blacksmith. A man and his work. It's the toil and tribulations of one single man that makes the axe a cult object. But are the axes any better? We've invited two real Swedish woodsmen to find out. Marcus and Ole. They will perform the test, the German DIY store axe against the hand-forged cult object from Sweden. Marcus tests the expensive Swedish axe, Ole the €40 DIY store axe. I think we'll only see a difference when we get to the big logs. The task is simple. The two are supposed to chop small logs for 10 minutes. Both axes seem to manage this without any problem at all. The blades go through the wood like butter. But what about bigger logs? Is the handmade axe not only cult but also a test winner? Or is it just a luxury no one really needs? The Swedish axe splits the block. The DIY axe has to pass. But let's be fair, it could be due to the wood or the force used. But for both men, one thing is certain. After a storm in Sweden only this winter, we bought cheap axes. After 3 or 4 days, we had to throw them all away. So then we bought some here, and we're still using them. A must for professionals, not really necessary for hobby users. But isn't that perhaps what makes it a cult? Forged with ancient craftsmanship, from the axe head to the handle. Here, people live their passion and devotion to the product. This is how they create a real cult object. The handmade Swedish axe.